Back when I was in college in France, a few friends and I were invited to a house party one weekend. It wasn't advertised as an all-night rave or anything, but given that the drinking age is lower than in the US, there would be a lot of wine and beer, and it was certain to get pretty wild. My friends and I were really excited. We knew there would be plenty of girls, and being the young single guys we were, we saw it as a great opportunity to meet potential dates and have some fun. We arrived at the party, reeking of cologne, wearing terrible button-up shirts, and carrying our own stash of drinks. At first, we awkwardly drank among ourselves, but as the night went on and the alcohol took effect, we started mingling more. One of my friends, Pierre, began flirting with several girls. It was amusing to watch him struggle at first, especially since he was our designated driver and hadn't been drinking, so he was still pretty nervous and clumsy. But then, we noticed that one of the girls, a beautiful brunette named Amélie, seemed genuinely interested in him. As much as I'd like to say we gave him space to work his charm, we didn't. We kept teasing and harassing him, playfully of course, but it was still unwelcome. Eventually, Pierre told us to back off, saying we were ruining his chances. Only then did we finally respect his wishes and leave him alone. By this time, we were pretty drunk and went off to entertain ourselves, giving Pierre and Amélie some privacy. A little time passed, and we started wondering where they had gone. We looked around the house, checking all the rooms, but they were either empty or occupied by people drinking or smoking. Pierre and Amélie seemed to have vanished. In the process of searching for them, we found Amélie's friends and asked if they knew where the new couple had gone. They informed us that Pierre and Amélie had gone out to Pierre's car for some alone time. We knew exactly what they were up to. Although Amélie's friends made us promise to leave them alone, we couldn't resist the temptation to sneak a picture or two for posterity. Admittedly, our plan made us complete jerks. Violating someone's privacy, especially in an intimate moment, is wrong and illegal. Our plan was to have one of us sneak up to the car and secretly record whatever was happening inside. The rest of us stayed back at the party to maintain the element of stealth and avoid suspicion. We kept Amélie's friends occupied, trying and failing to flirt with them until we grew impatient. The friend with the phone, Alex, should have returned by then with some incriminating photos, but there was no sign of him. Unable to wait any longer, I went outside to look for him. I found Alex sitting on the curb, but Pierre's car was nowhere in sight. He was on the phone, and judging by his expression, it was a serious call. When he hung up, it was clear he had been crying. I asked where Pierre and Amélie were, and he just shook his head and told me we needed to leave immediately. We hailed a taxi and headed back to his apartment. Over a few beers and some cigarettes, Alex told me what had happened. When Alex had reached Pierre's car, he found Pierre alone in the passenger seat, his head in his hands, tears streaming down his face. Alex repeatedly asked where Amélie was and what had happened, but Pierre wouldn't or couldn't say anything. Finally, Pierre pointed to the back seat. Alex looked and saw a blanket covering what was clearly the shape of a person. He lifted the blanket and found Amélie, unresponsive and not breathing. Alex panicked and told Pierre to call emergency services, but Pierre refused, saying he needed to think. Alex realized that staying in the car was a terrible idea, contaminating what was now a crime scene. He jumped out of the car, shouting at Pierre to get out, but Pierre just started the engine and drove off. Faced with a horrifying choice, Alex did the right thing and called the police. We later learned that Pierre had somehow suffocated Amélie, though the exact details were never clear. He had planned to drive into a river to take his own life and hide what he'd done, but he couldn't go through with it and was found by the police. He was subsequently arrested and pled guilty to everything, hoping for a lighter sentence. For a while, the case was a big story, but as time passed, it faded from public memory. However, for those of us involved, the horror of that night remains vivid. Alex often recalls the moment he realized he was sitting in a car with both a dead body and the killer. That realization was the scariest feeling of his life. But what terrified him even more was the thought of one of Amelie's friends asking where she was and not being able to tell them the truth. We got out of there before anyone at the party knew what had happened, which was selfish, but the fear and panic drove our decisions. Reflecting on it now, I realize we should have warned everyone, especially Amelie's friends, about what had happened. They might have continued partying, unaware that one of their close friends was gone forever. That night changed us all. The excitement of meeting new people at a party turned into a nightmare that none of us could have anticipated. It's a haunting reminder of how quickly things can go wrong and the lasting impact of one tragic mistake. Back in my sophomore year of college, I met a girl named Emily. She was the epitome of a wholesome, small-town Midwestern girl, raised in a strict, church-going family. We quickly became friends, and it wasn't long before we introduced her to the wilder side of college life. For the sake of privacy, we'll just call her Emily. Emily had never touched alcohol before college, so the first time she tried a wine cooler with us was a big deal. We justified it by telling ourselves that it was safer for her to drink in our dorms than at some random party, where people might take advantage of her. She was eager to fit in and experience everything college had to offer, so she happily went along with it. At first, it was just weekend drinking sessions, which were fun and harmless. But as the weeks went by, Emily started wanting to drink more often. Hump day drinks became her new thing, and she tried to get us to join her for midweek drinking sessions. While we indulged her a few times, it became clear that we couldn't keep up with her. We had classes and assignments to think about, and midweek hangovers just weren't feasible. Despite our reluctance, Emily persisted, often calling us boring or lame for not wanting to party with her all the time. After the winter holidays, Emily's behavior took a darker turn. She started hanging out with a different crowd, people who partied harder and more frequently than we ever did. These new friends introduced her to more than just alcohol. They smoked pot, took ecstasy, and even dabbled in cocaine. Emily, eager to fit in, started using these substances too. Her new lifestyle quickly took a toll on her. She stopped attending classes, and her appearance changed drastically. When we saw her again, it was a shock. She had lost a significant amount of weight. Her eyes were sunken, and she looked like a shell of her former self. She came to us one night crying and asking for help. She told us that her new friends had abandoned her when she couldn't pay off her drug debts, and now dealers were threatening her. We did everything we could to help Emily. We stopped drinking in solidarity with her, helped her change her phone number, and even hid her away in our dorms to keep her safe from her so-called friends. For a while, it seemed like she was getting better. She started going to classes again, gained some weight back, and seemed more like her old self. But then, one day, Emily disappeared. She stopped showing up to our dorm, stopped answering her phone, and even missed classes. We panicked and went to her dorm to find her, but her room was eerily empty. Her clothes, laptop, and personal items were all still there, but there was no sign of Emily. We immediately reported her missing to the campus police, who escalated the case to the local authorities. Emily's parents were devastated when they found out what had happened. They couldn't believe their daughter had gotten involved with drugs and partying to such an extent. They made emotional public appeals, pleading for anyone with information to come forward, but no one did. Emily was officially listed as a missing person, and despite all efforts, no trace of her was ever found. Months turned into years, and Emily's case went cold. Her name remained on missing person registers, but the hope of finding her alive dwindled with each passing day. I often think about what might have happened to her. Is she out there somewhere, trying to survive on her own? Or did something terrible happen to her? The uncertainty is the worst part. I can't shake the feeling that we, her friends, are partly to blame. We were the ones who introduced her to drinking and partying. We should have been more protective, should have seen the warning signs earlier. There's a part of me that will always feel responsible for what happened to Emily, and no amount of reassurance from others can change that. Every time I hear about a missing person or see a news story about someone disappearing, I think of Emily. I wonder if she's still out there, if she's okay, or if she's met a tragic end. It's a haunting thought, and it's something that will stay with me for the rest of my life. I just hope that wherever she is, she's at peace. When I was in college, I dated a guy named Jack. Our relationship started in a rather unexpected way. We were complete opposites. He was a social butterfly majoring in arts, while I was a reserved engineering student. Despite our differences, we clicked and started dating. For a year, everything was great. He made me laugh, and we complimented each other in ways I never imagined possible. However, after the holidays, things began to change. Jack, who was always outgoing and full of energy, started to withdraw. He spent more time in his dorm room, often alone. It was so unlike him. I chalked it up to the stress of our sophomore year, but deep down, I knew something else was wrong. One night I went to visit Jack, expecting our usual routine of watching movies and talking. Instead, I found him lying in bed, barely acknowledging my presence. He seemed distant, lost in his own world. I tried to engage him in conversation, but he responded with monosyllabic answers, his eyes glued to a video game. When he finally got up to take a shower, I decided to tidy up his room a bit. That's when I found a half-empty bottle of pills in his desk drawer. The label read, Adderall. I was confused. Jack had never mentioned having ADHD. A quick search on my phone revealed the potential side effects: paranoia, hallucinations, mood swings. Suddenly, everything made sense. When Jack returned, I confronted him about the pills, trying to be as gentle as possible. I told him I was worried, that I loved him, and that I wanted to help. He reacted with anger, accusing me of snooping and invading his privacy. He denied everything, even as I held the bottle in my hand. The argument escalated until he was shouting at me, his fists clenched. I was scared, more scared than I had ever been. Eventually, he calmed down and admitted that he had been using the pills to help him stay awake for his late-night gaming sessions. He promised to stop and flushed the remaining pills down the toilet. For a while, things seemed to improve. Jack's mood lifted, and he started going out again, but it didn't last. A few weeks later, I noticed the same changes. He was staying up late, often drinking alone. When I confronted him about it, he dismissed my concerns, saying he was just stressed about school. But I knew it was more than that. I found out from one of his friends that he had started taking the pills again. This time, when I confronted him, his reaction was even more violent. He grabbed me by the shoulders and shoved me against the wall, screaming at me to leave him alone. I could see the fear and anger in his eyes, and I knew he wasn't himself. He was spiraling, and I didn't know how to help him. The final straw came one night, when Jack's paranoia reached a breaking point. He was convinced that his parents were spying on him through his car. In a fit of rage, he drove it into a tree, destroying it completely. He called me, begging me to help him flee to another country, convinced that it was the only way to escape. I refused, telling him that he needed help, not to run away. Jack's response was terrifying. He grabbed a knife from the kitchen and lunged at me. I managed to dodge the first swipe, but he caught me on the second, slicing my arm. The pain was excruciating, but the fear was worse. I screamed for help, and luckily, a neighbor heard and called the police. When the officers arrived, Jack was out of control. It took 3 of them to subdue him, and they only managed it after tasing him. He was arrested and charged with assault. I didn't press charges, but the state did. Jack was sentenced to 5 years in prison. I still write to him sometimes. He's not a bad person. He made some terrible decisions and paid the price. I often wonder what might have happened if I had been able to help him sooner. The scars on my arm are a constant reminder of that terrifying night and the boy I once loved, who lost his way.